XPath options. So the options which are present in the XPath or which we can use along with XPath are and, I can use or, I can use contains, I can use starts with, and I can use text, which means which we can identify that particular element with inner text. See, these are all the options which we can use when we are writing an XPath, and it is very important before working on this directly to know how we can write XPath, that to relate to XPath. Let me write once again the syntax of relate to XPath. So the syntax of relate to XPath is it should start with double slash and we'll give tag name, and inside the square brackets we'll mention attribute. So every element in the HTML has a tag name, and each element has multiple attributes, and each attribute has a certain value. Attribute is equal to value. So I need to specify at the rate here. So this is what the relate to XPath syntax is. And coming to and as well as or, these are like Boolean expressions. So when I say and, so this and operation can be performed between two values. Suppose you can say A and B. So if both A is true and B is true only, result will be true. If any one value is false, then result will be false. Then coming to or Boolean expression, A or B. This is the syntax for this. Coming to or, if both are false only, then result will be false. If any one is true, then result will be true. In the same way, I'm just using and as well as or in the XPath. So when I use and, I can use it in the locator. So when I use and, both the locators like A as well as B should uniquely identify that element. When I use R, it also identifies, but as we have seen in the CSS selectors, if it is a complex web page, only one attribute is not enough. So that is the reason why we have done a multiple combinations like tag name with class, tag name with ID, tag name with attribute. In the similar way, if it is a complex web page, and if I want to identify any web element with more accuracy, then I can use XPath with options. I can go for and as well as or, contains, start with, as well as text. These are all the things which we can accurately identify any element on the web page. So by these points, you will not understand anything. Let me go to any one website so that you can understand. Let me open incognito. Let me take facebook.com. If you observe in the facebook.com, let me inspect this email text box as well as password text box so that you can understand. So if I inspect that, this is what you will see. So if I inspect email text box as well as password text box, this is the HTML code, or these are the respective HTML codes. For email as well as password text box, since these are all text boxes, in the text box we will input any value, we will give any value. So since it is a text box, its tag name is input. And if you can see, each element is having tag name and it is having multiple attributes: text, class, name, ID, data test ID royal, like placeholder, autofocus, area label. Similarly for the password text box as well. So up to now, suppose if I want to identify, suppose email text box, what I am doing, I'm just writing one locator. So how I can write the locator by using a relate to XPath. So double slash, first to specify the tag name, input is the tag name, and thereafter open square brackets, and in the square brackets you will specify attribute. What is the attribute I can take? So you can take, like, suppose class is there. So when I say class is equal to what is its value? So I can say, you can go here and you can just copy that here. So for the class, this is the value, attribute value. So I can specify it here. And this anyway uniquely identifies this particular text box. Let me inspect this and let me control F, control V. If you can see, this particular XPath is anyway uniquely identified in this email text box. But I don't want to confine with only class. I want to use any other attribute in this along with class. Along with class. So what I will do, I will try to use another attribute along with its value using or, and condition. If you can see, so this is the HTML code fine, and you can include and or in the XPath only. How you will include? So if you can see, if you want to use another attribute, just to specify and here, and you can take any another attribute, like I can take data test ID royal. So this is another attribute, data hyphen test ID. It is another attribute and it is having the value. What is the value? If you can see, the value is data test ID. Yeah, royal email is the value. Let me go here. Let me copy it. Let me close with another quotation. If you can see, for the same element to be located, I have used the locator along with the relative XPath, and I have used two attributes. One is class and data test ID. So anyway, this will identify this element. This also identifies this element. So both will be true. Then in this case, the whole and condition becomes true, and this whole XPath, relative XPath, will definitely and uniquely identify this element. So let me make this, and if you can see, paste it here. If you can see, it also identified that particular element. So instead of using one attribute, if I think this one attribute relates to multiple elements, or it will locate multiple web elements, I want only that particular element. So along with that attribute, you can use another attribute. You can use under condition here. When you use under condition, these both locators should identify the same element. If it is identifying the same element only, then it will identify the whole element. I mean the same element. If it is identifying one element and if it is identifying another element, when you use XPath with and, this locator will not work. So both should identify the same element. Means both should be true. Similarly, how you can use or condition? You can use or condition in this way. Just instead of and, you can use or. So anyway, this particular locator identifies this particular element only, email address or phone number text box. Similarly, data test ID, it is an attribute of this particular text box, and it will also identify the same element. And if suppose any locator or any attribute is not able to identify that particular element, fine. So in that case, it will be false. Suppose this particular attribute along with its value will identify that element. So one is false and the another is true. Anyway, you are using or. So if any one is true, if any attribute locates that particular element, then when you use or condition, this whole locator identifies the same element. So in the same way, you just try to take one example. Control C, go here, Control F, Control V. If you can see, it anyway identifies this element only. Suppose if you can see, class is having input text space underscore 55R1 space underscore 6LUY. This is the class attribute value. What I am doing, just I am giving a wrong value. Suppose you can say Z. Even though if you give Z here, this locator or the value of class attribute is not able to identify this particular element. If you can see, remove this. Let me try to take Control X. And if you can see here, suppose if I have given wrong attribute value, suppose I'm just giving some random value Z. So if you see, this particular thing or locator is not able to identify any element because of the wrong attribute value. So that will be fine. I am anyway using wrong attribute value, but I am also using another value, which is data test ID royal email is its value. So even though this particular locator is not able to identify this element, this locator is able to identify this particular element. So if any one thing identifies that element, then the whole locator will be able to identify the same element. So one is false, the another is true. When you use or condition, it will return true only. Means any one locator will identify that element. So in this way, you can use and or in XPaths. Very important. So since it is also an XPath, what you will do? You will anyway use driver dot find element and you will use by dot XPath. This is the syntax, and you will specify the locator here. Locator with and or. So this is what you need to do. Since these are also XPaths only, so that is the reason why you will find that element with by dot XPath only. And upon performing the locating that element, you can perform whatever the actions you require. If it requires, if it returns a single element, you can perform the click action, or you can use send text, or you can try to get the attribute, anything which you want. So in this way, you can identify any element by using and or. We will see an example, don't worry. And let me discuss another important concept, contains and starts with. You take a button, contains and starts with. You just take a button, suppose. So when I say a button, in general, you take this example. So a switch or a button is having off state and on state. I can say start as well as or stop. These are the two states which a button is having. Suppose when the button or the switch is in on position, its ID is start. Suppose if the switch or the button is in off position, then suppose you can take its ID attribute is stop. If you can see, it is just a similar example which you can correlate with the attributes in the HTML code for any element. I'm just giving you an edge how you can use contains and starts with. Suppose it is a button, or you can think of button as a switch. So switch has two states, on position and off position. So I'm thinking on is at start, and when the switch is in off position, suppose it is having the ID attribute as stop. And in both the states, whether it is on or whether it is off, suppose if you observe the ID attribute, it is having st constant. So when it is in on position, it is having start. When it is in off position, it is having ID as stop. But in these two, st is common. Even though we have changed its state, or this button or this element or this switch is dynamically changing, there is something in common, even though it changes its state. If you can observe in this example, st is common. In the word start or stop, st are the two characters, those are same, even though it changes its state. So how I can find this button? I can find this button in two ways. It contains st. At the rate ID, it contains st. Even though it is in off position, it is in on position, it anyway, this ID attribute still contains st. So when I use st, it uniquely identifies this particular button. Or in the another way, how you can identify, you can use starts with. Even though it changes its state from on to off or off to on, st is common. So st is the two characters present at the starting position. So when they are presenting at the starting position, I can use starts with. So this is what you need to understand. You can take this particular image for your understanding. if you can see, this is a start or stop button. When it is in start position or in on position, its ID is start. ID attribute is having start value. So that is the reason this is the XPath. At the rate ID is equal to start. Similarly, when it is in off position, or you can say start position, its ID is stop. Since it is dynamically changing its states. So in the, if you can observe, or in any website, there are some elements which they can dynamically change their states or change their attributes. If you can see, when it is in stop position, its ID is stop. So this is the XPath. And in the two states, ST is common. START, STOP. ST is common. So that is the reason why I am identifying the same element, even though it's changing its states dynamically by using contains. So contains means that ST anyway in its attribute value will be present in the first position or in the second position or in the middle or at last. Wherever it is, since it is a dynamic element, it has this value, you can use contains. Similarly, starts with also. If you observe, ST starts with or starts at the starting position. So if it is starting at the starting position, the value or a part of a value. So if you can observe, ST is a part of a value, not the full value. Even though it is a full value or a part of a value, you can use starts with. So if it is a dynamically changing element, there is something common, even though if it is dynamically changing its attributes, values, there is something in common. You can use that common thing to identify that element. Or you can also use XPath with R. So if it is in on position, this will be identifying that element, or if it is in off position, it will identify that element. So you can use R condition also, you can use starts with, you can use contains, but most preferably you will use contains and starts with. Very important. So in this way, you can identify that element. How you can write an XPath for the same? If you can observe the same image, let me copy it here. Let me write the XPath for the email. You can use driver dot find element, find underscore element, and you are anyway just using all these options with XPath. By dot XPath, and you need to specify that XPath locator here. So XPath starts with tag name, / tag name, and in the square brackets for the relative XPath, you will anyway specify attribute and its value. But when you are using contains and starts with, the syntax starts with contains. And in the contains, whatever the attribute you are using, you need to specify that. Suppose if you can say, so in this particular HTML code, ID I am just taking, you can specify @ID, and for this ID you are having name. You can use the full value or you can use part value, that is up to you. So this is the XPath. This is the XPath. Very important. You can use the contains in this way. Similarly, how you can use starts with. So you can just take this and let me write another or take another attribute here. Let me take starts with, and I will just specify placeholder. This is the placeholder. So it starts with email. So I can use email here. If you can observe here, email is the starting word of this placeholder. So starts with email. So in the similar way, you can identify another elements also which you require. Up to here, it is very important. And or contains as well as starts with. Post the example with and or contains and starts with, we will see text also. We will see text also. Let me go to PyCharm. Let me create directory of day 21. In the day 21, let me create a Python file, XPath options. So anyway, if you want to write an automation script, there are some things which you need to import from Selenium package. Let me import that one by one. From Selenium WebDriver or from Selenium package, import WebDriver. So from Selenium dot WebDriver dot common dot by import by. Similarly, in the WebDriver, we have Chrome options, which are nothing but the desired options. Let me assign these to a variable options, or you can give any variable name what you want. So options dot add experimental option detach to. I'm just making it as true. And WebDriver dot Chrome. For this Chrome, just I'm sending the desired capabilities. I'm just assigning these to a variable driver variable. So with the help of this driver variable, I'm just trying to open the URL driver.get. I'm just using facebook.com. After this, I'm just maximizing the window, driver.maximize window. After this, what I want to do, I want to identify email. After identifying, I need to enter some random text into here. So I can identify the email with and XPath with and XPath with R conditions. Similarly, I can also identify email with contains or with starts with. Instead of email, I can also use login button, or you can use any element with contains or starts with R and or R. Let me write driver dot find element. You are anyway just finding dot XPath. So this is the locator which we have written it earlier. So I am just using and condition. I'm just specifying class attribute value and royal email ID value. This is the HTML code which you are seeing here. I have just taken it and just I have kept it here. You can use these two things. Right now, what I will do, I will use XPath with and condition. So thereafter, driver dot find element by dot XPath, and this is with R. And if you can see, the same locators are two locators, different locators will identify the same element. So instead of that, what I will do, I will execute the script with and condition first, and thereafter R condition. So after identifying, I need to perform send keys or send text. Let me take some random text x, y, z. Similarly, when I identify the same element with and condition, I can use the same thing. Let me comment with R and execute this. Before this, let you implement implicit wait. You will not understand what is implicit wait right now. Allow me some time, or allow me some more classes so that you can understand. So let me execute right now. I'm just identifying that email text box, and just after identifying, I'm just sending some text into the text box. If you see here, I have used the XPath with and condition. So that and condition is having two attributes, and I have specified the two attributes along with their values. So two attributes identify the same element. So the whole locator identifies the same element, and it has entered appropriate or random text which I have given. So in the similar way, let me try to execute that same with R condition. If you can see, let me execute this. I'm just finding that email text box with R condition. Yes, in this case also, it identified the same. In this way, not only with email text box, any website, any element you can identify with and or R condition in XPaths. Similarly, how you can identify the same element by using contains and starts with. So before going to that, let me write that find element, driver dot find element by dot XPath, and let me specify that locator here. Before specifying, let me go to this. Let me identify the same element with the help of contains and starts with. And every element is having tag name. I'm specifying the tag name here, input, and inside the input, I'm specifying contains. So let me take any attribute. Let me take ID. At the rate ID, comma, this ID is having email is the value. So this is the locator with contains. Anyway, this locator identifies the same element. Let me copy this. We go here. Let me paste it here. Let me use single quote, and let me send keys. Use send keys, and let me send random value into this. Execute. Yes, when I use or when I find that look element with the help of contains in the XPath, it identified that element and it has entered some random text. Similarly, how you can identify the same element with the help of starts with. Suppose if I want to use starts with, let me use instead of contains starts with hyphen. Yes, it also identifies the same element. Instead of email, you can use part of that. Yes, ID anyway starts with email. I can use whole word, or you can use I can use part. EMA is a part of email, so this also identifies the same element. Let me comment this. Let me try to give it another time. Control C, and you can specify it here. Control. So let me execute one more time. Yes, when I use starts with also, it identified the same element. It identified the same element. And it has entered some random text. Very important. And or contains starts with. And there is another option you can use in the XPath. What is that another option? You can use text. So when I say text, it means inner text of that element. So XPath with text, very important. As you used contains and starts with in the XPath, in the similar way, you can also use XPath with text. How you can use? When I say text, it means it identifies inner text of the element. So text method identifies an element by using inner text. Suppose go into this facebook.com. If you can see, this is a link. Forgotten password is a link. So always for every link, we have link text. So link text is nothing but inner text of this particular element. This I have repeated multiple times. Inner text may be a link text or may not be a link text, but link text always an inner text. So let me try to inspect this. If you see this particular element, which is nothing but forgotten password link, is having inner text as forgotten password. Although it is a link text which is having a tag of A, every link text is nothing but an inner text. So I can identify inner text by using text method in XPath. So let me execute that, or let me write the text path. So always relative XPath starts with /, and you need to specify the tag name. Yes. So the tag name of this particular element is A. In the similar way, how you used contains and starts with, you can also use text. Text means inner text. What is the inner text here? Forgotten password. Similarly, if you can see here, this is the forgotten password is the inner text of this particular element. You can comment it, or you can specify that inner text in the relative XPath, and you can try to close this. If you can see, when I specify text, you need to specify equal to. Text means inner text. So you can try to use this, and you can try to go to PyCharm, and you can use driver dot find element by dot XPath. So even though you are using text in the XPath, you can need to use py.xpath. So, and you need to specify the XPath here. Instead of double quotes, you need to use single quotes. It is very important, otherwise you will get an error. Let me comment this. And since it is a link, always on a link, I'll perform a click action. Let me execute that so that you can understand. So I have identified this particular element by using text. Text means inner text. In the similar way, like contains starts with, I have used XPath with text option, nothing but inner text. Let me execute this. If you can see here, it has clicked that particular link text and it has navigated to another page. In the similar way, if you can see here, when I click this particular forgotten password, it navigated to this page. In the similarly, that what automation script has been executed. In this way, you can use XPath with and, or, contains, starts with, as well as text. And there is another important point. After the XPath, you need to know these things. If you can see here, in the HTML code, every element is having tag name. Along with tag name, it has multiple attributes, and each attribute has a value. Now, my requirement is I have identified this element by so and so locator, that will be fine. But in some cases, I want to print any of the attribute of this element. In this case, what you will do, you will use get attribute method. You will use get attribute method. Let me write that or note it here so that it will be very clear for you. Get attribute, get underscore attribute. So this is the method which it will get the attributes of any element. So let me write that one point. So it always returns values of any attribute of web element. So before getting the attribute value of any element, you need to find that web element, and thereafter you can fetch that attribute value. So let me go to Facebook, and you can take login, and if you can see, this login button or web element is having button as a tag name. And let me find this button by using XPath. If you can see, it starts with button tag name, and thereafter it's having name, and for the name it is having login. So when I use log or login, and you are using starts with, you can also use contains with. Take this as an assignment. Instead of starts to, you can use contains with. So this anyway identified that element. Yes, fine. So let me try to comment this, and let me write, or let me identify login button. So this is login button which we identified the locator right now. Login button, that is equal to driver dot find element by dot XPath, and in the XPath you can specify the locator which identified that particular element. Right, that will be fine. And thereafter, so once you identify this element, after identifying this element, I need another attributes. You anyway identified this element by using name, that will be fine. Other than name, you have value is one attribute, class is one attribute, data test ID is another attribute, type is another attribute. For every attribute, you will have the value. So for each and every attribute, instead of name, you need to fetch what the value it is having. So for fetching the attribute values, for returning the attribute values, you can use get attribute. So I can use login button. This anyway I have identified by using driver.find element. I have given the locator for this. So for this button only, I have another attributes as well. So if I want to fetch or return what are the another attributes, I can specify that attribute name in the get attribute, driver.get attribute. So in the get attribute, if you can observe here, I can specify class. When I specify class, this is the attribute. It will return the class value here. If you can see, I'm just specifying class. So let me execute that. So before executing, since anyway it returns, when it is returning, you can use print statement. When it is returning, you can use print statement. It is executing. And if you can see, for the login button, anyway we have identified with starts with, and for the same login button you have another attribute class. I'm just printing the class value. This is the class value. If you can see here, and also let me paste it here just for your reference. Let me go here and let me copy this, and let you see it here. The same value it has returned. In the similar way, instead of class, you can also return any attribute what you require. Suppose data test ID. This is the attribute which I want to return its value. So instead of class, what you can specify? Data test ID array. So let me execute it here. Let me clear this before. You can see instead of class, you can specify data test ID. So this what this get attribute method does. This get attribute method returns values of these attributes. If it is returning, I can print or I can assign it to a variable. I can do whatever the operations I can perform. So data test ID, this is the attribute and this is the value. Let me copy it here. Let me paste it for your information. See, this has to be printed in the console when executed this script. It opened that URL and it performed the actions, and if you can see, this is the attribute value which we have copied it from the HTML code. So in this way, after identifying that element, you will identify that element with any one attribute, and there are a lot of attributes which you may perform some actions based on your requirement. So you can get that attributes, other attributes with get attribute method. Very, very, very important. In this way, you can use get attribute. Another important concept, it is very important. Anyway, we'll ask in the interviews, and you can use XPath as like content starts with or text and or R. You can use that XPath with normalized space. You can use XPath with normalized space. Let me write that point here. XPath with normalized space. Normalize space. So this is the XPath with normalized space. Be aware of this, how you can use. So what is the use of this normalized space? As like, text method, when I use XPath with text method always identifies element by using an inner text. Then when I use XPath with normalized space, what does this normalized space do? This normalized space does or removes leading, trailing white spaces in the string. So all leading as well as trailing white spaces are removed in the string. Removed in the string. Very important. What does this normal space does? Within a string, any sequence of white space characters are replaced with a single space. Single space, very important. This is an interview question which you can expect in the interview. All leading, trailing white spaces are removed from the string, as well as within any string, if you have sequence of white spaces, characters between the two words of a string, if you have sequence of white space characters, those are replaced with a single space. Similarly, another important point is removes all new lines and tabs present in a string. So by this, you will not understand anything. So if you can see, let me write that syntax here. The syntax for this is, as like you specify / tag name in the relative XPath, in the similar way you can specify it here. / tag name, and inside the tag name you have used starts with, contains as well as text. Instead of them, you can use normalize space. So in the normalized space, you will just specify function, or I can say, or simply you can take off this like attribute. You can take off this attribute, and this attribute is having some certain value. You can specify that value in double quotations. So this certain value may be having leading or trailing white spaces, sequence of white spaces, and new lines as well as tabs also. All those are taken care by normalized space. Suppose you can take this. Suppose this particular string, this is the string, like one space, two spaces it is having, and thereafter it is having some word CHER, and again it is having two spaces, and again it is having chair, and so it is having two spaces, Two spaces is nothing but one tab. When you specify one tab, it is nothing but two spaces. Similarly, it is having some another word, some text, or it is some random value. So for any random attribute, this is the value, certain value. So suppose you can take string is the certain value. If you can see, that particular attribute is having multiple spaces, leading spaces, and trailing spaces. And in between the characters, you are having sequence of white characters. Sequence of or two spaces is nothing but tab, as well as new line also. At last, when you use normalized space, how it will look like when you use normalized space of string. So it will look like, the output will be look like, I can say CHER space text. This is what it looks. When you use normalized space, all leading and trailing spaces have been removed, and in between the sequence of white character spaces between the characters, white spaces between the characters, and these are replaced by a single white space. And if there is any new line present in this text or new tab present in this text, normalized space removes all those and it will print in this way.